Morning, everyone. Live on the picket lines in just a moment as 500,000 people go on strike today. First, let's bring you the latest on the mystery of the missing mum who vanished walking her dog in Lancashire. The case of Kay Burley making the front pages of many of this morning's newspapers. What on earth has happened to her? Police have spoken to a possible witness. The 45-year-old was last seen on Friday morning. Her mobile phone was found on a bench near where she was last seen in St Michael's on Wyre in Lancashire. It was still connected to a conference call when it was found. Her dog, Willow, was also found loose between the river and the bench. Officers say the investigation remains a missing persons inquiry and there is nothing at the moment to suggest third-party involvement in her disappearance. You can see frogmen are searching the rivers nearby. Her partner Paul says the situation is just perpetual hell. He said he and his young daughters are living through this, but it doesn't feel real. All we can say is we need to find her. She's got two little girls that need their mummy home. Nicola's friends had this to say.
You go from being hopeful to being heartbroken to being and just trying to be strong because all we want is to find her.
She's got two little girls wanting a mummy, so anybody's got any information, please just come forward. We don't know why she's missing, where she is, we just want her home.
Lancashire Police are calling on anyone who may have seen her on Friday morning, anyone who's got dash cam footage that may pinpoint her to a certain spot, to get in touch with them. Two little girls want to know where their mummy is. To strikes now in thousands of schools as short train services are cancelled, and disruption is also expected at airports and at universities as Britain braces for the biggest day of strike action in a decade. Teachers, train drivers, civil servants and border force staff are involved in a coordinated series of walkouts. The government is warning of significant disruption. So, around 500,000 workers will stage strikes across the UK. No region will be unaffected. Teachers belonging to the National Education Union will walk out from more than 23,000 schools in England and Wales. The union says 40,000 new members have joined since it announced 6 days of strikes. Members of the Education Institute of Scotland are striking in Aberdeen and also Clackmannanshire. Parts of the week, we're told, as part of their regional strikes, and more than 70,000 staff at 150 universities in the UK are taking strike action with the University and College Union. 100,000 civil servants in the Public and Commercial Services Union will walk out in 123 government departments, the biggest civil service strike in a decade. Thousands of rail workers from ASLEF and also from the RMT unions are on strike again, with 14 operators affected. And the Trades Union Congress, or TUC, is leading a march on Parliament as part of a nationwide protest against new laws to limit strike action. And we'll be covering every angle with our correspondents right across the country. Alice Porter is at London's Euston Station, Fraser Maud is at a job centre in Leeds, and Dan Whitehead is standing by for us at a school in Cardiff. Ladies first, what's happening in central London? Good morning.
Good morning to you. Yes, members of the ASLEF union, which represent about 96% of train drivers across the country, are striking today. This is the 7th day of industrial action that they've taken over the last 12 months or so, and this is very much over a long-running dispute over pay. The rail delivery group, they put forward a backdated 4% pay offer for last year and 4% for this year, but that's been rejected by ASLEF. They say the terms and conditions associated with it make it unacceptable. They're wanting something in line with inflation, and that's why we're seeing industrial action today and Friday, which means only about 30% of train services will be operating across the country.
OK, thank you. Fraser, the situation where you are?
Civil servants on strike today from over 120 different departments. That includes everything from museums to job centres to border force to Ofsted, driving instructors, it's driving examinations and so on. So it could affect an awful lot of people. The union, the PCS, they say they're wanting 10%. They haven't been offered anything near that. They say anything less would be effectively a job cut. They're wanting protection of jobs, protection of pensions as well. Potentially the biggest impact that this strike could have now is at border force. We have seen them strike before. We saw them strike before Christmas. We saw members of the armed services brought in to help out at various centres, particularly the border crossings over into France, and that will be the case again today. But the advice, of course, as always with these sort of strike actions, might be difficult to get away anyway because of what's happening with the rail strikes. But if you are planning on going abroad, or if you have got people coming back into this country, they may face some significant delays at the crossing points.
OK, and finally, Dan, where you are?
Yeah, morning, Kay. We're outside Clinician High School in Cardiff. It is one of around 23,000 schools that is impacted by strike action today. It will see around 100,000 teachers right across England and here in Wales walk out in a row over pay. Now, the governments in both countries, in Wales and England, are urging schools to try their best to stay open, but there is clearly going to be a significant impact. Some schools just opening partially, with certain year groups coming in. And that, of course, is a huge impact for parents who are having to figure out childcare right up and down the land today. This, as I say, is in a row over pay, and outside this school later, we are expecting a picket line to form with members of the National Education Union. This is the first of 7 days of strike action being carried out this month and next month by school teachers. The next strike is taking place on the 14th of February, and that only impacts schools here in Wales.
OK, thanks to all of you. I know you're going to update us throughout the course of the morning. Thank you. And we have all the union bosses on the programme as well this morning on a special morning of coverage on the biggest strikes in a decade. And if you scan the QR code on your screen right now, here it comes, you can listen to this morning's daily news podcast as the country faces the biggest day of industrial action in a decade. Also coming up on the programme for you this morning, a 4-year-old girl has died after being attacked by a dog at a property in Milton Keynes. Police have described it as a tragic incident and say the child's family is being supported by specially trained officers. Police were called shortly after 5 o'clock last night after a report that a dog had attacked a child in the back garden of a property in the Netherfield area of the city. The child died at the scene shortly afterwards. No arrests have been made. In a statement, police said this is an absolutely tragic incident in which we believe that a child has been killed after being attacked by a dog. Clearly, we are in the very early stages of an investigation, and it would be wrong and unhelpful to speculate as to the exact circumstances of this incident at this point. Internet personality Andrew Tate is due in court in Romania today alongside his brother Tristan to appeal against their detention. The British-American nationals have been held in custody for more than a month over allegations of rape and human trafficking, which they deny. Well, joining us now is Siobhan in Romania's capital of Bucharest. Hello to you, Siobhan. Tell us more. Good morning.
Morning, Kay. I'm at the back of the court because in the last 15-20 minutes we've seen both of the Tate brothers and 2 Romanian women who were arrested alongside them arriving here in court. Andrew Tate, as he went into the back door there, saying, "You know I'm innocent." And today his lawyers will again be trying to get him and his brother released after they were arrested at the end of December, looking at an investigation into human trafficking, also allegations of rape. And as part of that investigation, police have seized an estimated $4 million worth of money and goods from property connected to the brothers. They have denied all of the allegations against them. They have said that they need to be released. At the moment, though, just in the last couple of weeks, a court here actually extended their detention as police continue to investigate. So as it stands, they're due to stay in detention until at least the 27th of February. That is what their lawyers will be trying to overturn today.
OK, for now, Siobhan, thank you. Also making news for you this morning, police have been alerted over claims that Dorset and Wiltshire firefighters photographed dead bodies of women in car accidents. It's reported that images were shared on a WhatsApp group and that male firefighters made comments about the type of underwear the victims were wearing. Dorset and Wiltshire Fire Service has commissioned an independent investigation into the claims and says it's shocked and appalled by the allegations. Of course, that story will be developing during, again, the course of the morning. Meantime, the United States is preparing more than $2 billion worth of military aid for Ukraine, which is expected to include longer-range weapons for the first time. It comes as Ukraine is preparing for a major escalation by Russia. Let's get the latest, should we? Deborah standing by for us at the scene in Kiev this morning again. So more is coming their way. They wanted these long-range missiles, but they want aircraft as well.
They want jets, they need these tanks that they've been promised to come online faster because they're expecting that there's going to be much more fighting ahead. In fact, I spoke to the President's top security official, Alexei Danilov, yesterday, and he said to me that they believe that the hardest fighting is yet to come, and they're also expecting potentially for that fighting to begin rather sooner than later. This is what he had to say.
Російська Федерація зараз готується до максимального загострення. Вона зараз збирає всі можливі і неможливі сили, які в неї є, проводить зараз навчання, тренування. Чи буде йти з усіх боків? На сьогоднішній день я можу сказати, що ми не виключаємо будь-якого розвитку сценарія подій найближчі 2-3 тижні.
So the Ukrainians are preparing for new offensives themselves. He wouldn't go into details about that. It must be said, though, that a Western official speaking to journalists yesterday said that they didn't believe that, well, they hadn't seen any specific signs of Russia planning anything around the 24th of February, but they're monitoring that, noting that Russia does quite like making actions around specific dates. So really, here right now, the fighting raging in the east, an expectation that it's going to get worse.
OK, for now, thank you. Still to come on the programme for you this morning, joined by the General Secretary of the Trades Union Congress, Paul Novak, ahead of today's nationwide protests over the government's anti-strike legislation. As the 100,000 civil servants strike, I'll speak to Mark Zawotka, the General Secretary of the Public and Commercial Services Union. And just after 8, joined by the Shadow Justice Secretary, Steve Reid. The UK government has been too slow in addressing the challenges of climate change and will need to invest billions of pounds to prepare for the impacts of a warming climate. The Independent Climate Change Committee says £10 billion a year will be required as part of a major programme of investment to prepare the UK for the impacts of climate change. It says the country must prepare for flooding and proofing houses and infrastructure against its impacts. Investment will also have to be made to protect the public water supply and in nature restoration. Let's get more about that, should we? Our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, joins us on the programme this morning. Hi, it's good to see you. Tell us more about this report.
Well, this is the stuff that we already are going to have to do to cope with the climate change that's coming. You know, we hear a lot about what the government's doing to reduce the likelihood of climate change, building more wind turbines, switching us off fossil fuels. What the Committee on Climate Change is saying, the government's made it clear it's got a plan for that. It's got a clear pathway of how it's going to phase out fossil fuels and switch us over, although it could be arguably doing better in getting us there. But when it comes to adapting to the climate change we're already going to see, they've got a lot more work to do. There isn't a clear plan of action. There isn't really much of a plan in place at all. The government respond, they have got an adaptation plan coming out later this year, but there are some important things it needs to include. This report says, you know, how are you going to make the money flow to finance these things? And they say a lot of it doesn't need to be new money, although there is a lot of money.
I was going to say, how much is it going to cost?
They estimate it's not unreasonable, they say, about £10 billion a year. And that's every year going on through the rest of this century. Take homes, for example. They're saying at least £1 billion a year might be needed to make our housing cope better in the heat. Remember the heat waves we had last year really put a lot of us in very uncomfortable houses, very high heat. I think we had nearly 3,000 excess deaths last summer because of excess heat. So there's costs there. But they're saying not all of this money has to come from the taxpayer. A lot of it is just about diverting flows of existing money to factor in the fact climate change is going to be happening. So, for example, flood protection, making room for water to go when we get extreme rainfall, or when the council's doing up the road, make a plan for where the rainfall's going to go while you're doing the improvements, because we are looking at decades worth of timescales.
Thanks a lot. Speak to you more throughout the course of the morning. Thank you. Meantime, parts of the world experiencing extreme weather conditions as well. Let's have a look at the impact of climate change on the planet. The right half this is obviously our indicator. It was broken for a bit. It's fixed again now. We love showing you these figures in the morning. Quite often, it's not nil for coal, 1.7% today. Renewables heading towards 2/3. Gas, 10.5%. The top one is how much higher it is, the temperature now, than 1880. And this is how much CO2 emissions are taking. Now, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has wrapped up a 2-day visit to Israel and the occupied West Bank after one of the deadliest outbreaks of Israeli-Palestinian violence in years.
First and foremost, diffusing the current situation, the current cycle of violence, reducing tensions, not escalating them, calming things down, not ramping things up. That is the immediate focus. And I heard both from Palestinians, including President Abbas, as well as from Israelis, some ideas for how we can move that forward. My hope is that if that succeeds, then we can look to both sides to take some positive steps to try to rebuild confidence, rebuild trust, and that in turn lays the foundation for, at some point, pursuing 2 states.
Well, joining us now is our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, standing by in Jerusalem. Hi, Alistair. He's gone home. What's he achieved?
Well, look, firstly, I would say that I think there were some messages to the Israeli government, particularly when it comes to internal matters like judicial reform, which is a big thing here for many Israelis. We've seen tens of thousands out on the streets, and it's something that America clearly opposes. So I think there was messages to the Israeli government in private and in public on that. As for the increasing violence between Israelis and Palestinians, Antony Blinken was treading a very thin line, a very difficult line to balance the two. America are a very strong ally of Israel, and they are, to some degree, clearly engaged in what is going on here. But I don't think that this American administration, this White House administration, sees what's going on here as one of their main priorities at the moment. And we heard nothing new from Antony Blinken when he was over here. There were no sort of new grand ideas of how to break the impasse, talk of a 2-state solution, which diplomats, not just in America, but around the world, have always sort of clung on to as an ambition. It's just so far down the road from where the situation is right now. It's not a realistic prospect. And I think the other really great concern is that in the current Israeli government, there are figures who don't want to step back. They want to push, they want more settlement expansion, and they want to push into Palestinian land. And that means that this situation remains very volatile.
Education Secretary Gillian Keegan is in the studio on the programme for us now. Good morning, good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to see you as always. How many schools are closed or partially closed today?
Well, we don't know that. We'll know later on today and we'll publish that this afternoon. We have done a survey which a lot of heads responded to, so that gives us some idea. And that said it just said the majority of schools would be open. But we've got open. But we've got how many are open, then how many are open with some restrictions, how many are open to everybody. Obviously, we're really disappointed that any are closing, but we will know later on today, and then we'll publish that information.
OK, I was speaking to the joint head of the NEU union. And he says that there was not, when he came in to see you, the minister brought no proposals whatsoever to the table, nothing on pay this year or next, no suggestion of non-consolidated lump sum, no pay rise. What's the point in calling them in?
Well, we need to continue these discussions. So I've met with them now since the 9th of January. I've met with them 3 times, by the way, for over an hour each time. They keep talking about half an hour meeting, but it was an hour and 10 minutes, that one. And we've also had 2 official meetings, one of which was 6 hours to go through all of the details. We have to keep these discussions open. Obviously, when you're around the table, it's not going to be, here's our inflationary pay rise plus whatever. This is not going to happen. It would be irresponsible of us to do that.
So what's the point of coming in?
Because we need to find where there is a landing zone, really. So when you look at teachers and teachers' pay, and when you actually look at teachers' sort of things that irritate teachers or things that they want change in, it's always workload, behaviour sometimes, and other aspects of bureaucracy, as well as looking at pay to make sure that we can recruit the very best and retain teachers as well. So what we've said to them is, look, we cannot... As a country, we cannot put, for some parts of society, an inflation or inflation plus rise, which, many people are striking for. What we have to do is halve inflation. That's the most important thing, or get it even lower than that. And then everybody in the country will benefit. We can't bake in inflation, which is what will happen if we start to get wages spiralling out of control in inflationary or even more than inflation rises. So that is the huge focus for this year. But what we've said to them is, we accept, and we've worked with them a lot on recruitment and retention challenges in the past. And we've said, we will look at future pay, we will look at workload, we will look at flexibility. The teachers also want to look at more job sharing and flexibility. We look at all of those things. That's the point of calling them in, because we believe, get something which would be fair to teachers, and we're always looking to be constructive. We want our children to have the best education in the world. That means we need to attract people into teaching, and we need to retain people and motivate people as in
OK, but the pointy-headed finance people will say inflation, inflation, inflation. The Institute for Fiscal Studies says that teachers have seen a 13% real-time loss in pay, £6,000 pay cut between 2012 and 2022. It's hardly surprising they're angry.
Well, when they look, the Independent Pay Review Body, when it looks at all of this, it takes 9 inputs. It looks at pay, it looks at other people's pay, it looks at, retention, it looks at recruitment, it looks at inflation, it looks at all of those things and comes up with. So just so your listeners know, the average classroom teacher is paid £39,500. This year, the pay rises were 5% for experienced teachers, 8.9% for new teachers. New teachers will be on a starting salary of £30,000 from September 23. That's as per our manifesto commitment. 40% of classroom teachers this year will be receiving up to a 15.9% rise, because as well as the pay on the bands, there's also progression within the bands. So it's actually more complex, and it is quite a complex picture. We've also looked at recruitment challenges, for example, maths and physics teachers, and some of the chemistry and some of the other science teachers, computer science as well. And we've put bursaries in place for those. We've also put a top-up for some of those schools as well, some schools in disadvantaged areas to attract those.
So teachers are paid enough, is what you're saying?
Well, teachers, everybody wants to be paid more. There's
not one teachers paid enough?
We look at that. We look at that in terms of recruitment, retention, and we look at that in terms of the starting salary. That's why we've improved the starting salary. So it will be £30,000
and
next
that'll be
year.
Enough?
Well, if it isn't, we'll look at it again. But we will. We have recruited and attracted a lot of graduates.
So
30,000 for somebody coming out of university. And that's across the country.
I'll let you give me all the figures. They keep going on strike. We've got several more strikes planned if they don't get what they want. You're saying strike as much as you want, there's no more money?
Well, no, what I've said is it's really disappointing, really concerning. This strike is not a last resort. The discussions we had on Monday were constructive discussions. They even said that at the beginning, whilst then saying I didn't come up with any offers, etc. And that's, of course, not what was going to happen. I'm not going to just go in and say, here you go, we will do inflation plus whatever. It would be economically incoherent to do that. We can't do that, and we've made that very clear. But we will get inflation down, so everybody will feel better, and the pound.
So you're just going to run down the clock until inflation starts?
No, we've said we will talk about future pay. We've actually held back.
This pay round.
Well, it's already. In fact, our future pay, our submission was actually due in last Friday, and we've halted it.
That's for next year. That's from April. What about this year? This is when they want the money.
Well, yes, and we've said, we're looking at future pay, we'll look at things like workload, but I've said what our objective is this year is to get rid of the problem, which is inflation. And we know why inflation's there, right? This is not usual inflation. It's very specific to the war in Ukraine and the overhang from the pandemic, two highly unusual things that are happening on our continent, and they've affected every country.
They have, but
so we don't want to bake in
anybody else's.
Well, we don't want to bake in inflation, and we need to get our economy so that it's better than everyone else's. And I think we can. But I think we can do that. You know, Jeremy laid out his plan. I'm very confident in our economy. I mean, you know, I've worked in business before I became a politician for 30 years in many sectors. I am very confident about our economy and our ability.
So will there be a significant pay
rise
rise next year for them?
Well, what we said is we will look and talk
in double figures.
No, I mean we will look and talk at what is reasonable to make sure that we always retain the best teachers and we attract the best teachers. You know, to have a world-class education system, you need brilliant teachers. That's something we both agree on. But the other thing we agree on is our children have been through so much disruption in the pandemic that, you know, it really is super concerning for children. They're already behind. We need to help them catch up. And that is, it needs teachers to be in school to do that.
Running out of time, let me ask you about Dominic Raab. Should the PM ask him to step back until the inquiry into his bullying is concluded?
Well, I personally think it is fair to let investigations continue. You know, I think that's the fair process. So I think actually it was Dom himself who instigated this investigation. So that's ongoing. Obviously, they're going to uncover all the facts. And then when you get the facts, you discuss them, take the action.
But what's it like for you as a woman sitting around a cabinet table with someone who allegedly makes his staff feel suicidal?
I sit around the cabinet table and, you know, don't see that, right? I don't see any, you know, I feel very comfortable with my colleagues around the cabinet table. I think it's only fair when somebody is, you know, there's something like this, somebody accuses somebody of something, that you go through a fair process. I think that is the right thing to do. And then the Prime Minister and Dominic will obviously discuss that and make the right decision based on that. You've got to go on the facts, and they're uncovering the facts right now.
OK, Jacob Rees-Mogg yesterday sat there where you are and told us that people are too snowflakey about bullying claims.
Well, I mean, I don't agree with that. I mean, bullying is very serious. And actually, you know, as the Education Minister, one of the things that really is worrying in schools is bullying, and online as well. The sort of way that bullying can spiral online is awful. So I don't agree with that. Bullying is wrong and people should not bully anybody.
It's good to see you. As always.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Bear with us one
Kay.
second, if you would. Looking at some of the front pages for you this morning. The Telegraph says there's a chance teachers could still be paid today, even if they participate in strikes. The Mail calls it a cynical walkout that betrays our children again. And The Sun covers the disappearance of mum of two, Nicola Bulley, in Lancashire, as police speak to a potentially key witness. Quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
North-south split in the weather over the next few days, but it will turn milder for most. Windy starts, severe gales across northern Scotland, bringing some travel disruption.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Hello again, everybody. Tamara is here to give us her take on what the Minister had to say this morning. Good morning.
Morning, Kay. Well, if the education unions had held out much hope for Gillian Keegan making them an offer, and I don't think they did hold out much hope, then on Monday they were rapidly disabused of that, because they had a meeting and left saying that she had not offered them anything. And what Gillian Keegan told us, we've heard similar from Steve Barclay, who's negotiating with the health unions, is that, yes, they're willing to talk about non-pay issues, about burnout, about retention, about workforce, about next year's pay after April. But when it comes to this year's pay, essentially, forget it. She said they're not going to come in. I'm not going to see them and say, right, there you go. And even on the prospect of an inflation level pay rise for next year, she said sort of 10% was basically a no. So inflation, we think, is probably at its peak at the moment. It may go down later this year. And I think for parents who are having to make alternative arrangements for their children, given the school closures in England and Wales today, it really does seem clear that these next 6 strike dates across England and Wales over the next 6 weeks are looking very likely to go ahead.
Yeah, so there's no more money. You can go on strike as much as you want. You're not getting any more money.
it does seem to be the message that in terms of this year's pay, the government feel on firmer ground with teachers than they do, for example, with nurses. There's a noticeable difference where Gillian Keegan says that teachers got 5% last year above other parts of the public sector, and that the most junior teachers are going to be starting on £30,000 from later this year as part of a government commitment. So they feel that teachers have, in context of the public sector, done OK, and it doesn't feel like they want to negotiate higher there.
OK, for now, thanks very much. Thank you. Well, nationwide protests are being held today by the Trades Union Congress over the government's controversial new legislation on strikes. This is the picket line in Cardiff. As we speak, we have our correspondents and reporters right around the country, and of course we'll be catching up with them all day here on Sky News. Don't forget, of course, that march later on today on to Parliament. The General Secretary of the TUC is with me now. Good morning.
Morning, Kay.
So, Mr Novak, tell me about the march later on.
OK, well, this will be part of our wider series of activities that are being held today to support our campaign to protect the right to strike, but also to stand up for our public services and to support those hundreds of thousands of public sector workers who are taking strike action today around pay and have been taking strike action over the last few weeks and months. So this is part of our whole series of activity up and down the country, and we hope that the government will take it seriously and listen to the voices of working people.
Why do you think they will?
Well, I would hope that any employer would have the good grace and the sense to listen to the staff when the staff tell them that there's a problem. And there clearly is a problem. It doesn't matter whether it's teachers, civil servants, physiotherapists, paramedics. Lots of workers saying we can't afford another year of a real terms pay cut. And now, as I say, Kay, I would expect any employer to say, well, listen, let's listen to your concerns, let's respond to those concerns, and let's try and deliver a fair pay rise. And up until now, unfortunately, the government hasn't done that, but I'm an optimist and I'm a negotiator, and I hope that the government will listen and will come to the table.
Education Secretary sat there a moment ago. She said, do what you want, there's no more money.
Well, you know, government is all about political choices, and I'm afraid this government has made the wrong choices. Now, Gillian Keegan is right to a certain extent. It's Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt that need to make the money available to fund a decent pay rise. And so far, the Prime Minister and his Chancellor have been missing in action. I think last time I was on your programme, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I said that we wanted to sit down with the Chancellor and the PM to talk about what could be done in terms of a fair pay settlement, new money on the table. We haven't had a response. Well, I'm not interested in beer and sandwiches or indeed tea and sympathy. What I'm interested in doing is resolving these disputes, but resolving them in a way that puts money in the pockets of all those public sector workers who say they can't afford another real terms pay cut. And you know, we've talked in the past about the staffing crisis in our NHS, 300,000 vacancies in care homes and in the NHS. We've got a staffing crisis in our classrooms as well. I mean, a third of teachers, around 250,000 of them, have left the profession within 10 years of qualifying. That's a problem for our schools, and it's a problem for the education of our kids. So the government has to do something to respond to those issues. Well, it's partly about money. It's partly about things like workload. But you know,
is what is being addressed by the Education Secretary.
Well, I don't think the reality is you can't resolve issues around workload, recruitment and retention and not talk about pay at the same time. And that's where I think the government are playing a little bit fast and loose with the British public to say somehow these things aren't connected. They're absolutely connected. And really, the government needs to sit down, as I say, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor come to the table, find some new money.
Yeah, well, they say there isn't any more money. The nurses want more money, the ambulance workers want more money, the train drivers want more money, the civil servants want more money, Border Control wants more money. In what order should people be getting money?
Well, it's important to sort of differentiate. So, for example, the train drivers are working for private companies. Those companies have handed out hundreds of millions of pounds in dividends to their shareholders. I think they could afford a pay rise for their train drivers. Well, actually, it's not about this group of workers is more deserving than the other. What we need is to see pay rising across the public and indeed the private sector. Now, what could the government do about this? The TUC will put in its budget submission today. We'll be at the Treasury today to put in our budget submission, and we'll be saying that the government could, for example, choose to tax the offshore, the oil and gas giants more heavily. They could choose to equalise capital gains tax with income tax wealth in the same way they tax workers. That alone would generate another 15 or 16 billion pounds. So government is all about choices. Unfortunately, this government has made the wrong choices.
Well, they are going to wear you down, basically, and it's going to get to April, and then they're going to say, that was last year, there's your money, we're talking about next year now?
Well, I hope that's not the attitude, to be honest with you,
Well,
Kay.
it is.
They're wearing down not just unions, they're wearing down the British public. I mean, I think, and I've been on the picket lines with our physiotherapists, with our paramedics, when the public are going past, beeping the horns, talking to those workers, showing their support, I think they're very clear whose side the British public are on, and I hope the government listens to that. You know,
It's not necessarily the case. I mean, we've both been doing this long enough to know what's going on, and there will be some support for our NHS. But the other unions, the government is going to wait until the public turns against them.
Well, I think they'll be waiting a long time, to be honest with you, Kay. I mean, it's clear. We did a poll just last week that majority of parents support teachers taking strike action. But at the end of the day, these are our friends, our neighbours, members of our local community. Everybody knows a teacher, somebody who works in the NHS, somebody who works on the railways. And I think the government trying to divide the British public away from striking workers, I think won't succeed, because those striking workers are part of the local community. They've got those, they're the face of those public services, and I want the government to treat them with respect and deliver a decent pay rise.
How many people have to take part in the march today for it to be deemed a success?
Well, it's not a big national rally, because obviously we do have the train strikes, so we're not bringing people in from all over the country. The key thing is we've got 80 events up and down the country, plenty of opportunities for people to show the support, and later on I'll be handing in a petition with 250,000 signatures to Downing Street about protecting the right to strike, and I think the government should listen to people power, listen to public opinion, deliver on pay.
Yeah, but if you've got a dozen people with a bullhorn and a dog turning up to Parliament, the government are going to use that as an illustration as to why you don't have any support.
Yeah, well, I don't think it will be a dozen people. What I think they should be looking at the fact is that 500,000 workers today will be taking strike action. That's on top of the hundreds of thousands who've already taken strike action, hundreds of thousands, potentially more to come over the next few weeks and months. They should look at that 250,000 signatures. They should look at those events up and down the country, and they should realise they've misjudged the public mood. And I hope that they do, and I hope that they come to the table.
Do you think there'll be another National Day of Action?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't rule anything out, Kay. My responsibility is to, when workers take that really difficult decision to take strike action, that we support them as much as possible, that we amplify their voices. And I think, the ball is very firmly in the government's court. Let's get round the table, let's resolve these disputes, and let's put money in the pockets of our hard-working public service workers.
Good to see you, as always. Thanks very much for taking the time. I know you've got a busy day. Thank you.
Yeah,
of course, we will be monitoring that march as it heads towards Parliament later on, putting up the Skycopter, and we're at picket lines up and down the country as well. What are your views? Let us know. You can tweet us directly if you would like to, at Kay Burley. Do the unions have your support, or do you agree with the government? There just isn't the money in the pot. Now, a record number of Elton John fans will be rocking away at his farewell tour. Well, his farewell Yellow Brick Road tour has become the highest grossing of all time, raking in a whopping £664 million. He's even topped Guns N' Roses, U2 and Ed Sheeran after kicking off the tour in 2018. Elton will play his final UK show at Glastonbury in June. Time now for a look through some of the photos that have caught our eye today. A picture of a priceless gold pendant dating back to the Tudor era. The 16th century artefact was allegedly used to celebrate the first of Henry VIII's marriages to Catherine of Aragon. Found in Warwickshire by a metal detectorist only 6 months into his hobby. Good for him. You'll never find anything as good as that, mate. Now, next up, thousands of people converged in Shetland for a Viking-inspired fire festival. It's Europe's largest fire festival. And this year, for the first time in its 142-year history, women and girls were allowed to take part in the celebration. And members of a Brazilian samba school rehearsed in the streets of Rio de Janeiro ahead of their annual carnival parade. Around 100,000 civil servants are on strike today, including union members in 124 separate government departments. Mark Sawatka is the General Secretary of the Public and Commercial Services Union, representing those walking out with us now. As you can see, hi. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Was this really necessary?
Unfortunately, this was necessary. The civil service have had the lowest pay award anywhere in the economy, 2%, even though inflation is at 10 and food inflation is at 16. We've tried for months to get the government to engage in discussions, and they're not even prepared to put money on the table at the moment, even though it's now been revealed that in 2 government departments alone, DWP and the tax offices, 47,000 people will get a pay rise on the 1st of April because they're now on the national minimum wage. So people who are delivering key decisions across a range of public services have had their pay cut for 10 consecutive years, now qualify for the national minimum wage. So there's a crisis of in-work poverty, 40,000 civil servants using food banks, 45,000 civil servants are claiming in-work benefits, the very definition of the in-work poor. But the government seems happy to give its own workforce far less even than everyone else has been offered and has rejected and are going on strike over. So this is necessary, I'm afraid.
Where's the money going to come from to give you any more money?
Well, we clearly think there's lots of money available, to be frank. It's a matter of political priority. The government claim it would cost, I think, 29 billion to give every public sector worker what they've asked for. Our calculations is actually would cost nearer 10 billion if you take into account the tax and insurance that is paid. And 10 billion pounds in an economy like ours can easily be found. And we know that this government, in the form of Liz Truss, a Conservative government, was prepared to borrow £200 billion for tax cuts. So it's a matter of if they prioritise paramedics, job centre workers and border force staff, or they're happy to see those people claim benefits and use food banks.
This is a list of what you're looking for from the government. I suppose the Chancellor and thus the Prime Minister would say to you in response, we cannot do this because it will fuel inflation.
Well, I don't think any serious economist believes that the current inflation has anything to do with pay. And our view is the Bank of England is trying to cut the inflation target, but the Bank of England is also worried about a recession. We narrowly missed a recession last time. Most people accept that if you're going into a recession, the last thing you want is for people to be impoverished and have no money to spend. We need people to be able to support the hospitality sector, the manufacturing sector. And if PCS members were to get a pay rise, I can say to you, Kay, they would not be putting it in the Cayman Islands or tax-free investments. They would spend it because people are desperate. And in our view, that has a boosting effect on the economy, and it is something that could easily be afforded and economically would be a wise thing to do.
Which departments, how will my viewers at home this morning be affected?
Well, there'll be a lot of effects today. It's a one-day strike, so job centres will be closed today. There's already picket lines at our airports and our ports. Museums and galleries will be closed. Passport offices will be closed. The Driving and Vehicle Licence Agency will be closed. The Welsh Parliament, for example, can't sit today. The Scottish Parliament will be seriously disrupted. So across all parts of government life, there will be picket lines today and there will be no public service. And that's for one day. But we've also announced that because this can't just be about a protest, there's going to be a week of strike action at the British Museum. There's going to be 4 days of strikes at the borders, including Dover and Calais and Dunkirk. And that's going to involve significant disruption. So our message to the government is rather than just duck this, rather than accept all this disruption, you must accept there is an economic and moral case to say we cannot have civil servants claiming the benefits they administer, visiting food banks and being on the national minimum wage.
It looks as though, I mean, certainly from what we heard from the Education Secretary this morning, they're not going to budge. They're not going to budge. Do you anticipate another day of action when 500,000 workers will be on strike?
I anticipate there'll be more than that the next time I think there's a day of action because the government's position is unsustainable. Now, let's be clear, they do U-turns at a pretty rapid rate. We've seen Rishi Sunak do a number of U-turns. It's not feasible that they can sit back with this unprecedented amount of industrial action growing because it's 500,000 today. Next week we have paramedics and we have nurses. There will then be the firefighters we know have now voted for strike action. So the amount of people taking or voting for action is going to grow. And I don't believe the government will find it can get away with putting its head down while all this disruption takes place. And I think they'll be forced to take a much more realistic attitude. But if they refuse, we are planning for our campaign to continue right through the summer with both long-term sustained targeted strikes, but also mass actions like today. And I think we will see, if there is another one, it will be even bigger than the one today.
And when do you anticipate that might happen?
Well, there's strikes next week, as we know. We know that the teachers' unions, for example, have announced 2 days of strike action in March. One of those days is on Budget Day. And I think it would be a fair guess to say that lots of unions will be looking to see whether that is a really good time for us to come back together. But that's a long time away, Kay. And if Rishi Sunak is watching your programme or Jeremy Hunt...
Well, they both do. Good morning.
I think they need to realise that they can't get away with this. They cannot have this in-work poverty in this country at this level, and they cannot have the disruption that we're seeing. And they're going to have to do something about it, and the sooner they get on and do that, the better.
So just to clarify, you're saying that if the government doesn't come back with more money, an offer of a decent amount of money, in your opinion, then in 6 weeks' time we will see more than 500,000 workers on strike all on the same day?
I'm saying that if the government refused to improve any offers and doesn't put money on the table, there will be more and more strikes. And given we already know that the teachers have already announced a 2-day strike in the 15th and 16th of March, I think it's very likely that other unions may well take the same decision. Our union's National Executive Committee will meet next week, and we will take a decision on future action, and that will be one of the things that we'll be discussing.
What do you need? What can the government do in order to stop that?
Money now. We cannot have a situation where they tell us you just have to wait. I mean, our 2023 pay, which they tell us to wait for, in some cases isn't due till August. I mean, to be honest, the energy bills are going up in April. The crisis is now, and we need money now, and we've made that absolutely clear. But we also need in the civil service an agreement. They're not going to cut the tens of thousands of jobs they're threatening to cut. They're not going to cut our members' redundancy terms, Kay, by a staggering 33% is the cuts they want to make. They want to make tens of thousands redundant and cut their contractual redundancy by a third. And also yesterday we were in the High Court because they know that our pensions are currently unfair and we're paying too much for our pensions despite an independent public sector valuation. So in short, treat us with the dignity and respect we deserve. We were clapped in the pandemic. Now give us money to avert this crisis.
Okay, with 30 seconds to our fair, one final word for Jacob Rees-Mogg, who said we don't need this many civil servants.
What we don't need is Jacob Rees-Mogg.